It is a Tuesday evening. The dinner dishes are sitting in the sink, the math homework is crumpled on the floor, and your child is staring at you with a defiance that feels entirely disproportionate to the request to simply brush their teeth. We have all stood in that hallway. In this exact moment, 14 weeks of parenting theories collide in your mind. Do you hold a firm boundary to build discipline? Do you kneel down to validate the underlying emotion causing the resistance? Do you simply walk away and let natural consequences take over? We spend hundreds of hours researching how to be good parents, consuming infinite amounts of data on emotional regulation and behavioral psychology. Yet, when we are standing in the hallway at 7 o'clock at night, all that information often just feels like noise. The paradox of modern parenting is that we have never had more access to evidence-based strategies, and we have never felt more unsure of our own intuition. Let us explore the tension between the data we read and the reality we live. I have noticed a quiet exhaustion that settles over parents when they try to synthesize everything they read. We find a book that suggests absolute consistency is the bedrock of a child's security. The very next day, an article insists that flexibility and emotional attunement are the true keys to resilience. The tension between these ideas is where guilt is born. We feel like we are constantly failing one metric while trying to succeed at another. But what if the goal is not to adopt a single parenting philosophy wholesale? When we look closely at families who navigate the chaos with a sense of calm, we rarely find a rigid adherence to one specific doctrine. Instead, we find a highly customized framework. They have built a North Star that serves as a filter. They know which trade-offs they are willing to make. To build this for ourselves, we have to dismantle the major approaches we have discussed over the past 14 topics and observe how they actually function in a living room. Before we begin dissecting these approaches, I want to invite you to join the community of thoughtful parents who are navigating these exact same tensions alongside us. Subscribing to this channel means joining a space dedicated to curiosity rather than judgment, where we trade the illusion of perfect parenting for the reality of intentional parenting. Finding your North Star is not a solitary exercise. It is a shared exploration. As we move through these contrasting philosophies, you might find pieces of yourself scattered across approaches that initially seem entirely at odds with each other. That is not hypocrisy. That is the complexity of raising a human being. We will start by looking at the 4 primary gravitational pulls in modern parenting. For every single approach, we will explore the foundational belief, the living room reality, the developmental cost, and the specific family dynamic where it actually shines. Let us begin with the approach that has dominated generations and still holds a powerful place in our culture, the authority-first approach. The authority-first philosophy is rooted in the belief that children crave, above all else, the predictability and structure provided by a confident leader. The core assumption here is that the world is chaotic, and a child's internal landscape is equally turbulent. Therefore, the parent's primary job is to serve as the unshakable container. In this model, boundaries are not suggestions or starting points for negotiation. They are the walls that keep the child feeling safe. The logic suggests that when a child knows exactly where the edge is, they no longer have to waste cognitive energy trying to find it. They can relax into the structure. We often hear this framed negatively in modern discourse, associated with harshness. But when we view it through an exploratory lens, we can see the underlying intention is deeply protective. It prioritizes clarity over consensus. The parent assumes the heavy burden of decision-making, so the child does not have to, sheltering their developing brain from the anxiety of having too much power. What does this look like in a living room on a Tuesday night? It is the parent who sets the timer for screen time and, when the alarm sounds, calmly but decisively turns off the television regardless of the protests. There is no elongated conversation about why the show needs to end, no deep dive into the child's disappointment. The boundary was stated, and the boundary is enforced. If the child escalates into a tantrum, the parent remains present but does not alter the outcome to soothe the child's distress. The reality of this approach requires an immense amount of parental stamina. You are the brick wall. Being a brick wall means absorbing the impact of a child's frustration without crumbling or yielding. In practice, this might look like enforcing a bedtime with precision or refusing to engage in mealtime negotiations. It is highly efficient in the moment. The situation is managed, and the household routine moves forward with a rhythmic predictability. Every approach has a hidden cost, and the trade-off with the authority-first model centers around the development of internal regulation. By consistently acting as the external regulator for the child, providing the brakes and the steering wheel, we risk delaying the child's ability to build those mechanisms for themselves. If compliance is the primary currency, a child learns how to follow directions exceptionally well. But they might not learn how to navigate their own internal compass when the authority figure is no longer in the room. This approach prioritizes short-term household peace and physical safety, but the cost is often long-term self-advocacy. Furthermore, this approach can inadvertently suppress emotional literacy. If the focus is always on the behavioral output, the underlying emotional input often goes unaddressed. A child might stop throwing the toy because they fear the swift consequence, but they have not necessarily learned how to process the overwhelming frustration. We are trading emotional exploration for behavioral predictability. Despite the modern pushback against it, there are specific dynamics where this approach is not just effective, but deeply necessary. Who is this actually for? This model shines in environments that are inherently chaotic or during seasons of massive family transition, such as a move or a significant loss. When a child's internal or external world feels entirely out of control, a rigid, highly predictable authority structure can feel like a profound relief. It is also an incredibly supportive framework for children who struggle with high anxiety or certain neurodivergent profiles where open-ended choices create paralyzing distress. For a child who is easily overwhelmed by options, a parent who firmly states what is happening and how it is happening removes a massive cognitive burden. It is a lifeline. The authority-first approach fits best when the primary threat to the family system is instability, and the most urgent need is a reliable, unquestionable anchor. But what happens when the anchor feels too heavy? What if the problem we are trying to solve is not a lack of discipline, but a lack of connection? If we pause and shift our lens for a moment, we have to ask a difficult question. Are we demanding compliance from our children because it is actually what they need for their development, or simply because it is what we need for our convenience? This brings us to a radical departure from the brick wall model. It forces us to look at the exact opposite end of the spectrum, where the parent is not the container, but the co-regulator. Let us explore this second major philosophy, one that has fundamentally reshaped modern parenting discourse over the last decade. The attachment-led philosophy operates on a beautifully simple but radically demanding premise. Connection must precede correction. The foundational belief is that a child's behavior is simply data. A tantrum, a refusal, or a defiant act is not viewed as a challenge to parental authority, but rather as a distress signal from a dysregulated nervous system. In this view, a child is never giving you a hard time. They are having a hard time. The parent's primary role shifts from being an enforcer of rules to being an emotional translator and a safe harbor. This approach prioritizes emotional safety above all else. It assumes that if a child feels deeply understood and emotionally validated, the desirable behaviors will naturally follow as a byproduct of internal security. Instead of molding the child to fit the environment, the parent often acts to soften the environment to accommodate the child's current emotional capacity. It is a philosophy of profound empathy. In the reality of a Tuesday afternoon, this approach asks a tremendous amount of the parent. When a child throws their dinner plate on the floor, the attachment-led response is not a timeout or a swift reprimand. It is an immediate attempt to de-escalate the nervous system. The parent might get down on the child's level, take a deep breath, and softly observe that the food was not what they wanted. It often involves sitting on the floor through a 45-minute emotional storm, offering physical comfort while the child rides the wave of their feelings. The living room reality is incredibly time-intensive. There is a vast amount of narrating emotions and validating disappointment. It means routines are fluid. If a child is distressed about leaving the park, the parent spends 15 minutes empathizing rather than simply putting them in the car. The parent must act as the grounding wire for the child's electrical storm. The hidden cost of the attachment-led approach is often absorbed directly by the parent. The trade-off here balances the child's emotional safety against the parent's mental health and the family's operational bandwidth. When every emotional fluctuation requires deep validation, the cognitive load on the caregiver becomes staggering. We risk crossing the line from healthy support to emotional enmeshment. Furthermore, if we consistently soften the environment to prevent a child's distress, we may inadvertently rob them of the opportunity to develop a tolerance for mild, ordinary frustration. The world outside the living room does not naturally adapt to our emotional needs. By acting as a constant emotional buffer, we might delay a child's realization that they can survive feeling uncomfortable or disappointed. We are trading potential emotional hardiness for a high degree of emotional literacy. There is also the blur of boundaries, where children become confused about where the hard lines actually are, leading to chronic negotiation. Who benefits most from this emotionally intensive model? The attachment-led approach is profoundly effective for highly sensitive children. Kids who process the world with intense volume, who startle easily, or who internalize stress deeply, thrive when they have a parent acting as an emotional translator. It builds a foundation of trust that these children desperately need to interact with a loud world. This model also shines in families where there is structural flexibility. If you have the resources and the mental bandwidth to sit through a lengthy de-escalation process without neglecting other urgent family needs, this approach cultivates incredible emotional intelligence. It is also a powerful restorative tool for families healing from relational trauma. When the primary deficit in the home is trust, leaning heavily into attachment is exactly the medicine required to rebuild the foundation. But what if we zoom out? We've explored the strict container of authority and the deep validation of attachment. Yet, if we look at the trajectory of a child's life, there is a looming reality we cannot ignore. Eventually, they leave. They will face a demanding professor, a difficult boss, or a complex relationship, and we will not be there to set the boundary or validate the struggle. If we constantly solve their behavioral problems with our authority or soothe their emotional problems with our empathy, what are we accidentally taking away from their 20-year-old selves? Are we making childhood so heavily managed and frictionless that we are failing to prepare them for reality? Let us explore the third perspective, a philosophy that asks us to step back significantly: the independence-driven approach. The independence-driven approach, sometimes called free-range parenting, is built on the philosophy of capability through struggle. The core belief here is that children are inherently robust beings who learn best by confronting the natural consequences of their own actions. In this model, the parent's job is not to manage the child's behavior, nor is it to soothe their every emotional distress. The parent's job is to prepare the child for the path, not the path for the child. This philosophy assumes that competence breeds confidence. It operates on the premise that when a child navigates a difficult situation on their own, they build a psychological immune system. They learn that failure is not fatal. The parent acts as a consultant rather than a manager, providing a safe home base but intentionally refraining from intervening in the child's daily friction. It requires a profound trust in the child's innate capacity to figure things out. In practical terms, this looks entirely hands-off in ways that can make modern culture uncomfortable. If the child realizes they left their science project on the kitchen counter as they walk to the bus stop, the independence-driven parent does not grab the car keys to deliver it. They watch the bus drive away, knowing the child will receive a failing grade for the day. When siblings are arguing over a toy, the parent does not mediate or mandate sharing. They let the argument play out, allowing the children to experience the social cost of poor negotiation. The living room reality is messy. It involves watching your child make poor choices or wear shorts in the snow because they rejected your advice about a coat. The parent must sit on their hands, mastering the art of biting their tongue and allowing the natural sting of the world to do the teaching. The trade-off of the independence-driven approach is a delicate gamble with the child's perception of support. By prioritizing self-reliance, we risk the child interpreting our intentional distance as apathy or neglect. If a child repeatedly struggles without parental intervention, they will learn how to survive on their own, but they might also learn that they are entirely on their own. The cost of building supreme resilience is sometimes a subtle undercurrent of emotional isolation. We are trading the warmth of constant parental scaffolding for the harsh learning curve of reality. Furthermore, natural consequences are not always immediate or educational. Sometimes, the natural consequence of playing too close to a busy road is not a valuable lesson, it is a tragedy. This approach requires constant risk assessment from the parent. There is also the hidden cost to the parent's social standing, as allowing a child to fail publicly often draws fierce judgment from society. Who is this model beautifully suited for? The independence-driven approach works wonders for children who are natural risk-takers and possess a fiercely autonomous spirit. These are the kids who push back against any form of micromanagement and learn exclusively through their own lived experience. For them, too much parental involvement feels suffocating, and the freedom to fail feels like respect. This approach is also an excellent corrective strategy for families recovering from helicopter parenting. If a parent realizes they have inadvertently created learned helplessness by doing too much, shifting toward an independence model can rapidly restore the child's sense of agency. It shines in communities where there is a broader cultural safety net, where kids can roam without acute physical danger. It is the perfect fit when the primary goal is creating a fiercely independent young adult. We have now looked at 3 distinct points on the compass. The authority approach demands compliance to build safety. The attachment approach demands empathy to build connection. The independence approach demands distance to build resilience. If you are sitting there feeling slightly paralyzed because you agree with all of them and yet disagree with all of them, you are in exactly the right place. Conventional wisdom tells us we must pick a lane. But what if the healthiest families do not pick a lane at all? What if they act as a central hub, pulling the best elements from each extreme? In a moment, we are going to map these conflicting ideas into a single North Star. But first, we need to address the 4th perspective, the approach that attempts to thread the needle, the collaborative approach. The collaborative philosophy rests on the belief of guided autonomy. The core assumption is that a child is a rational being capable of immense insight, but they lack the life experience to see the full picture. Therefore, the parent and child are on the same team, solving problems together. Unlike the authority approach, where the parent dictates the rules, or the independence approach, where the parent steps entirely away, The collaborative approach brings both parties to the negotiation table. It operates on the principle of mutual respect. The parent holds the ultimate boundary, ensuring core family values. But within those boundaries, the child is given significant power to influence the process. The focus is on finding win-win solutions. If a rule is broken, the primary response is curiosity. The philosophy believes that when children are involved in creating the solutions to their own challenges, they are far more likely to adhere to those solutions. What does collaborative parenting look like in practice? It looks like family meetings. When the morning routine is consistently ending in missed school buses, the parent does not unilaterally impose a stricter schedule, nor do they just let the child be late. Instead, on a calm Saturday, they sit down and map it out together. The parent states their need to leave the house by 8 o'clock. The child is invited to state their need. Perhaps they hate feeling rushed. Together, they brainstorm solutions, eventually agreeing to pick out clothes the night before. In the heat of the moment, it involves immense dialogue. When a toddler refuses to put on shoes, the parent offers a limited choice, asking if they want to put them on themselves or need help. It is highly verbal and highly interactive. The living room reality feels like an ongoing workshop in diplomacy, constantly seeking the child's buy-in before taking action. The trade-off with the collaborative approach is the sheer cognitive load and the risk of negotiation fatigue. Treating a child as a diplomatic partner takes time, energy, and a massive amount of words. When every transition and every minor conflict is treated as an opportunity for mutual problem-solving, the day can drag endlessly. We trade the swift efficiency of parental authority for the slow, grinding machinery of democratic consensus. There is also a risk of creating an illusion of equality that a child is not developmentally ready to handle. If a child believes everything is up for negotiation, they can become deeply unsettled when they encounter a non-negotiable reality in the broader world. The hidden cost is parental burnout. The mental gymnastics required to frame every boundary as a collaborative choice can leave parents feeling like they are walking on eggshells, desperately trying to avoid a power struggle by over-explaining their reasoning. Who thrives in this collaborative ecosystem? This approach is spectacularly effective for highly verbal children who need to understand the reasoning behind a rule before they can respect it. Kids with a strong sense of justice or a deep need for autonomy often flourish here because they feel seen and intellectually respected. It is also an excellent fit for parents who naturally possess strong facilitation skills and have the emotional bandwidth to engage in constant dialogue. Families dealing with older children, particularly teenagers, often find this approach is the only viable way to maintain influence without sparking outright rebellion. As children grow, the collaborative approach transitions beautifully into a mentoring dynamic. It shines when the family culture values critical thinking above immediate obedience, and when the daily schedule has enough breathing room to accommodate lengthy discussions. We have dismantled the 4 primary gravitational pulls: authority, attachment, independence, and collaboration. If you look closely at your own parenting, you will likely realize you are already oscillating between these approaches. You might use authority when it comes to crossing a busy street, attachment when dealing with a nightmare, collaboration for weekend chores, and independence for social drama. This brings us to the core of the decision framework. The parenting North Star is not about picking one philosophy and defending it. It is about intentionally choosing which tool to pull from the belt based on 3 specific variables in your life. To synthesize the 14 topics we have explored in this series, we must run every parenting decision through a 3-step filter. This filter strips away the noise of what the experts say you should do and reveals what you actually can do. Step 1 of the decision framework is radical acceptance of your child's raw temperament. Not the child you imagined you would have, but the child sitting in front of you. A philosophy is useless if it is incompatible with your child's neurology. If you have a highly sensitive, deeply anxious child, applying a strict, independence-driven approach might genuinely overwhelm them. They require the scaffolding of attachment and the predictability of authority. Conversely, if you have a fiery, boundary-pushing risk-taker, smothering them in attachment-led emotional processing will likely escalate their behavior. They need the solid walls of authority or the hard natural consequences of independence. Your North Star begins by acknowledging how your child receives the world. You cannot choose a parenting philosophy until you accurately assess the raw material you are working with. The right approach meets the child where their nervous system currently resides. Step 2 is an honest audit of your own actual capacity. This is where most modern parenting advice fails. It gives you an ideal script without asking if you have the energy to read it. Your custom North Star must account for your mental health, your financial stress, your work hours, and your support system. The collaborative approach is beautiful, but if you are a single parent working 2 jobs, you simply do not have the time to hold a 45-minute family meeting. You might need to rely heavily on authority just to survive the week. If you are deeply depleted, trying to implement a high-touch attachment approach will likely lead to resentment. You cannot give what you do not have. Part of synthesizing your parenting philosophy involves letting go of the guilt that comes from adopting a less ideal approach simply because it is the only one you have the bandwidth to execute. Step 3 is evaluating the current season of life. Parenting is not static. A family's needs shift dramatically from month to month. Your North Star must be a dynamic compass, not a fixed map. If your family is in a season of acute crisis, a divorce, an illness, or a major move, the baseline requirement is stability. During these seasons, leaning heavily into authority and attachment provides the necessary survival container. However, if your family is in a season of peace, where routines are flowing and everyone is well rested, that is the time to push the envelope. That is the season to employ the independence approach, letting them take risks while the home base is secure enough to catch them. You might be collaborative during the summer, but shift into a strict authority figure during the first frantic weeks of a new school year. The framework asks you to constantly assess the weather. Let us apply this framework to a practical dilemma we explored deeply earlier in the series: screen time. How do you find your North Star when navigating digital boundaries? First, look at the child's temperament. If your child transitions off a tablet with relative ease, you might use a collaborative approach, sitting down together to agree on a time limit. But if your child turns into an absolute monster after 20 minutes of a game, their nervous system is telling you they cannot handle that autonomy. You must pivot to authority. The tablet is locked, and the decision is removed from their plate. Next, look at your capacity. Are you trying to cook dinner while sending a work email? In that specific hour, your capacity is 0. You might use screens as a tool of independence, accepting the trade-off of extra screen time in exchange for your own sanity. Consider another scenario: peer conflict. Your 7-year-old comes home crying because their best friend played with someone else at recess. If you blindly follow a single philosophy, you might default to an attachment approach, validating their sadness for hours. But if you run it through the framework, a different path might emerge. You assess the season. Is your child generally confident right now? If yes, you might choose an independence approach. You offer a quick hug, say that sounds hard, and then step back, allowing them to figure out how to navigate the social dynamic tomorrow. However, if your child is currently struggling with low self-esteem, their temperament demands a different tool. You might lean into a collaborative approach, actively coaching them through the conflict. The framework forces you to stop asking what the right way to parent is and start asking what this specific child needs from you in this specific moment. Over the course of these 14 topics, we have looked at sleep, feeding, discipline, play, technology, and everything in between. The greatest revelation in parenting is not discovering the perfect method. The greatest revelation is realizing that the perfect method is a myth designed to sell books. The most competent, deeply connected parents are not the ones who follow a script flawlessly. They are researchers in their own living rooms, constantly adjusting the variables. They are willing to be inconsistent if consistency is no longer serving the child. They are willing to abandon a parenting philosophy the moment it becomes more important than the actual human being sitting across from them. Building your parenting North Star means giving yourself the permission to be complex. You can be fiercely protective of your boundaries, deeply empathetic to emotions, totally willing to let them fail, and deeply respectful of their intellect. You do not have to choose a camp. As we close out this series, I want to leave you with a moment of peer reflection. We have explored the strict boundaries of authority, the emotional depths of attachment, the resilient distance of independence, and the guided teamwork of collaboration. When you look at your own messy, completely unique family, which of these perspectives resonated with your actual reality the most? Which philosophy feels like your natural baseline, and which one feels like the tool you need to consciously reach for more often? There is no right answer, only the answer that rings true for you today. Take a breath. Look at the children in front of you. Trust the framework you are building. The noise of outside opinions will always be there, but you now have the filter to turn it down.